Okay, it's time to finish Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. Finish with chapter 20, the final chapter, How to Get Someone Out of Bed, on page 151. It's been a pleasure reading for you. Hopefully we'll be able to read together again sometime. I am sure, said Mr. Wonka, addressing Grandpa George, Grandma Georgina, and Grandma Josephine, I'm quite sure the three of you, after all that, will now want to jump out of bed and lend a hand in running the chocolate factory. Who, us? Said Grandma Josephine. Yes, you, said Mr. Wonka. Are you crazy? Said Grandma Georgina. I'm staying right here where I am in this nice comfortable bed, thank you very much. Me too, said Grandpa George. At that moment there was a sudden commotion among the Oompa Loompas at the far end of the chocolate room. There was a buzz of excited chatter and a lot of running around and waving of arms, and out of all of this a single Oompa Loompa emerged and came rushing toward Mr. Wonka, carrying a huge envelope in his hands. He came up close to Mr. Wonka. He started whispering. Mr. Wonka bent down to listen. Outside the factory gates, cried Mr. Wonka. Men? What sort of men? Yes, but do they look dangerous? Are they acting dangerously? And a what? A helicopter? And these men came out of it? And they gave you this? Mr. Wonka grabbed the huge envelope and quickly slid it open and pulled the folded letter inside. There was an absolute silence as he skimmed swiftly over what was written on the paper. Nobody moved. Charlie began to feel cold. He knew that something dreadful was going to happen. There was a definite smell of danger in the air. The men outside the gates, the helicopter, the nervousness of the Oompa Loompas. He was watching Mr. Wonka's face, searching for a clue, for some change in expression that would tell him how bad the news was. Great whistling wang-doodles, cried Mr. Wonka, leaping so high in the air that when he landed his legs gave way and he crashed onto his backside. Snorting snozwangers, he yelled, picking himself up and waving the letter about as though he were swatting at mosquitoes. Listen to this, all of you, just you listen to this. He began to read aloud. From the White House in Washington, D.C., to Mr. Willy Wonka. Sir, today the entire nation, indeed the whole world, is rejoicing at the safe return of our commuter capsule from space with 136 souls on board. Had it not been for the help they received from an unknown spaceship, these 136 people would never have come back. It has been reported to me that the courage shown by the 8 astronauts aboard this unknown spaceship was extraordinary. Our radar stations, by tracking the spaceship on its return to Earth, have discovered that it splashed down in a place known as Wonka's Chocolate Factory. And that, sir, is why this letter is being delivered to you. I wish now to show the gratitude of the nation by inviting all 8 of those incredibly brave astronauts to come and stay at the White House for a few days as my honored guests. I am arranging a special celebration party in the Blue Room this evening, at which I myself will pin medals for bravery upon all 8 of these gallant flyers. The most important persons in the land will be present at this gathering, too, to salute the heroes whose dazzling deeds will be written forever in the history of our nation. Among those attending will be the Vice President, Miss Elvira Tibbs, and all the members of my cabinet, the chiefs of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, all the members of Congress, and a famous sword swallower from Afghanistan who is now teaching me to eat my words. What you do is you take the S off the beginning of the sword, then you put it on the end before you swallow it. And who else is coming? Oh yes, my chief interpreter, and the governors of every state in the Union, and of course my cat, Mrs. Tabbypuss. A helicopter awaits all 8 of you outside the factory gates. I myself await your arrival at the White House with very great pleasure and impatience. I beg to remain, sir, most sincerely yours, Lancelot R. Gilligrass, President of the United States. P.S. Could you please bring me a few Wonka Fudge Mallow Delights? I love them so much, but everybody around here keeps stealing mine out of the drawer in my desk. And don't tell Nanny. Mr. Wonka stopped reading, and the stillness that followed Charlie could hear people breathing. He could hear them breathing in and out much faster than usual. And there were other things, too. There were so many feelings and passions, and there was so much sudden happiness swirling around in the air it made his head spin. Grandpa Joe was the first to say something. Yippee! He yelled out, and he flew across the room and caught Charlie by the hands, and the two of them started dancing way along the bank of the chocolate river. "We're going, Charlie," sang Grandpa Joe. "We're going to the White House after all." Mr. and Mrs. Bucket were also dancing and laughing and singing, and Mr. Wonka ran all over the room, proudly showing the president's letter to the Oompa Loompas. After a minute or so, Mr. Wonka clapped his hands for attention. Come along," he called out. We mustn't dilly. Come along, Charlie, and you, sir, Grandpa Joe, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket. The helicopter is waiting outside the gates. And we can't keep it waiting." He began hustling the four of them toward the door. "Hey!" screamed Grandma Georgina from the bed. "What about us? We were invited too. Don't you forget that." "It said all 8 of us were invited," cried Grandma Josephine. "And that includes me," said Grandpa George. Mr. Wonka turned and looked at them. "Of course it includes you," he said, "but we can't possibly get that bed into a helicopter. It won't go through the door." "You mean if we don't get out of bed, we can't come?" said Grandma Georgina. "That's exactly what I mean," said Mr. Wonka. "Keep going, Charlie," he whispered, giving Charlie a little nudge. "Keep walking toward the door." Suddenly, behind them, there was a great swoosh of blankets and sheets and pinging of bed springs as 3 old people exploded out of the bed together. They came sprinting after Mr. Wonka, shouting, "Wait for us! Wait for us!" It was amazing how fast they were running across the floor of the great chocolate room. Mr. Wonka and Charlie and the others stood staring at them in wonder. They leaped across the paths over bushes like gazelles in springtime, with their bare legs flashing and their nightshirts flying out behind them. Suddenly, Grandma Josephine put the brakes on so hard that she skidded 5 yards before coming to a stop. "Wait!" she screamed. "We must be mad. We can't go to a famous party in the White House in our nightshirts. We can't stand there practically naked in front of all those people while the president pins medals over us." "Oh!" cried Grandma Georgina. "Oh, what are we to do?" "Don't you have any clothes with you at all?" said Mr. Wonka. "Of course we don't," said Grandma Josephine. "We haven't been out of that bed in 20 years. "We can't go," wailed Grandma Georgina. "We'll have to stay behind." "Couldn't we buy something from a store?" said Grandpa George. "What with?" said Grandma Josephine. "We don't have any money." "Money!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Good gracious me, don't you go worrying about money. I've got plenty of that." "Listen," said Charlie. "Couldn't we ask the helicopter to land on the roof of a big department store on the way over? Then you can all pop downstairs and buy exactly what you want." "Charlie," cried Mr. Wonka, grasping him by the hand, "what would we do without you? You're brilliant. Come along, everybody. We're off to stay in the White House." They all linked arms and went dancing out of the chocolate room and along the corridors and out through the front door to the open. The big helicopter was waiting near the factory gates. A group of extremely important gentlemen came toward them and bowed. "Well, Charlie," said Grandpa Joe, "it's certainly been a busy day." "It's not over yet," said Charlie, laughing. "It hasn't even begun." The end. I hope you enjoyed listening to this story. I love reading you chapter stories. Maybe I'll pick up a book sometime and I'll record some more on this channel. If you have any requests or anything, you can always tell your mommy and we'll find out together. Alright, I love you very much. Have a good sleep.